In rural Mississippi, Comer's restaurant was more than just a roadside diner. It was the heart of a small community. But on a warm summer evening, an unwelcome guest sat down at one of its tables. Leesa Gray, a beloved 16-year-old, pulled on her apron. She had no idea this shift would be her very last, or that she was being followed. Later that night, her car was found abandoned, along with a series of clues that screamed abduction. But was Leesa's flat tyre a cruel twist of fate, or was it all part of a sinister trap? Hello and welcome to the Little Shop of Crime. My name is Steve, and in store today we have a desperate manhunt, an apology carved in flesh, and a videotape so heinous that it's confined to a vault. Given the shocking details of this case, I'm genuinely surprised it hasn't received more attention. It's such a sad, awful story that evidently scarred a close-knit neighbourhood. A community that had to wait 22 years for this case to reach its full conclusion. This is the murder of Leesa Marie Gray. Welcome to Mississippi, bursting at the seams with musical history, famous for its southern hospitality, and where you will of course find the old man himself. What you won't find here is the hustle or the bustle. In fact, a big part of its southern charm is its small towns. Itawamba County is a sparsely populated region in the northeastern corner of the state. Scattered across the landscape are little rural communities. Dorsey is one such area, the type of place where everyone knows everybody else. The type of place where folks look out for one another. And one of these folks back in 2000 was 16-year-old Leesa Marie Gray. Okay, this is the bit where I say loads of positive things about the person you already know is the victim, but hear me out. Because researching this case, I found just so many quotes about her character that prove how much Leesa meant to the people of Dorsey. She's repeatedly described as a sweet, life-loving, always smiling, happy-go-lucky young person. She found joy singing with her church choir, helped out with its youth group, and spent her free time volunteering with the juniorettes. She was the one who stood up to bullies and welcomed others. A more wholesome young woman you'd seriously struggle to find. Leesa was best friends with another Leesa, ever since they were seated together in kindergarten. Together they shared a secret obsession with the Spice Girls, whispered about boys they liked, and did one another's hair and makeup for dances. Normal teenage stuff. Leesa Gray lived in Dorsey with her mother Wanda, her stepfather Mike, and her little brother James, who was 10 at the time. She'd just finished her junior year at Itawamba Agricultural High School, and during the summer ahead of her senior year, she decided to help out waiting tables at her uncle's restaurant, Comer's. Comer's restaurant was always the hub of Dorsey, run by Mike Comer and his family. It's a traditional roadside diner, found aside a remote stretch of Highway 178. It's been feeding comfort foods to locals and truckers and passers-by since 1970. Its doors are still open today, and I'd wager it's hardly changed a bit. Leesa Marie Gray was working the evening shift at Comer's on Thursday, June 22nd. The restaurant closed at 9 PM, and after helping clean, Leesa left at 10:30. She got in her car to make the short drive home, which was approximately 1 mile away. She never made it. When Leesa didn't arrive home by 11 PM, her mother Wanda began to worry. The drive only ever took a couple of minutes. She began to make phone calls, eventually speaking to a man by the name of Richard Talent, one of Comer's cooks. Richard told Wanda that on his way home he had seen a car on the side of the road with its hazard lights flashing. He said he'd go and check to see if it was Leesa's. Richard returned to the car and saw that it was Leesa's, but there was no sign of her, so he drove to Wanda's home and together they went back to the location of the car. It was here, on the corner of Highway 178 and Dorsey School Road, so she hadn't made it very far from Comer's. It was obvious why. One of her tyres was completely flat, but strangely the car was left unlocked with the driver's door ajar, and the keys were missing. But most concerning was that Leesa's phone and purse were inside. She was less than a mile from home. She could have walked, but there's no way she'd have left her belongings there like that. Wanda dialed 911 immediately, and Officer Sheffield arrived within minutes. As soon as he did, he knew he was dealing with an abduction, and so the investigation into the missing 16-year-old began. The first port of call was to speak to the staff at Comer's about visitors who'd been in there the previous day, and one particular person stood out. A man had arrived in a beige Oldsmobile earlier in the day, around noon, and had been openly flirting with Leesa, or at least attempting to, and failing. It stood out to staff because the comments he made were inappropriate, made even more so by the fact he was in his mid-30s and Leesa was just 16. But what piqued the interest of the police was that this man was also the last visitor to the restaurant. He arrived again right before they closed, at 9 PM, and ordered a cheeseburger to go, but this time he was in a different vehicle, a large green van. Richard, the cook who found Leesa's car, said he knew this man from school. He used to live in these parts. His name was Thomas Edwin Loden. Police learned that Loden was in the area visiting his ailing grandmother on the family farm just outside Dorsey. He was staying there to help out with a few repairs and odd jobs, as he often would. He'd grown up in Dorsey, having graduated from the same school as Leesa back in 1982. Loden came from a well-respected family whose roots run deep in Dorsey. There's even a local road named after them. But now he was 35 and employed as a marine recruiter in Vicksburg, where he lived with his wife and 2-year-old daughter. He was on 10-day leave and made the 4-hour drive to Dorsey on the 21st, the day before Leesa's disappearance. Loden was an 18-year veteran of the United States Marines and was highly decorated. He climbed the ranks to gunnery sergeant, receiving numerous commendations along the way, some of which from active combat during Operation Desert Storm as part of the Gulf War. His involvement in Leesa's disappearance seemed uncharacteristic, particularly as he had no criminal history whatsoever. This is the only shot I could find of the Loden farm, taken on what appears to be some form of Etch-a-Sketch. Anyway, it was here that a pair of investigators turned up early the next morning, hoping to speak with Thomas Loden. The door was answered by one of his grandmother's helpers. According to her, Loden was asleep inside. Since they had no warrant and there was little evidence he was connected with her disappearance, the officers left to speak with other Comer's patrons from the previous day. But not before they took note of the green van outside, which matched the description of the one seen at Comer's the previous night. Later that same morning, they returned to the property. By now, Loden was one of only a few people who hadn't been interviewed. This time, his grandmother, Rena Loden, came to the door. She told them her grandson was out fishing in a pond near to the house. They checked it out, but there was no sign of him, so they asked Rena if they could have a quick look around the home. Not an official, warranted search, just as a courtesy. She agreed, and inside Thomas Loden's bedroom they made a startling discovery. A pair of shorts with what appeared to be blood on them. Rena also gave them permission to search the Oldsmobile he'd been seen in, which turned out to be her car. Inside was a length of rope knotted into the shape of handcuffs. They now had enough evidence to obtain a full search warrant for the farm and Loden's green van. But the keys were nowhere to be found, so the van was towed and secured in a garage until the Mississippi Crime Lab could take a look inside. In the meantime, 2 search parties set out to scour northeast Mississippi, one to look for Leesa and one to track down Loden. It was a huge operation, involving helicopters, bloodhounds, and county, state, and federal law enforcement. And 10 hours later, on the late afternoon of the 23rd, Loden was discovered, lying in a ditch by the side of a road not far from his family's farm. He had self-inflicted lacerations on his wrists, and he'd carved the words, "I'm sorry," into his own chest. He was taken to the hospital to be treated for the injuries. He said he didn't know where, or even who, Leesa was. While Loden was being treated, the crime lab popped open his van. Inside was an horrific scene. Leesa Marie Gray's nude and battered body was found in the back, stuffed beneath a folded down seat. Her hands and feet had been bound with the same type of rope found in Mrs. Loden's car. The crime scene technician also found a compact camcorder. The tape inside contained footage more despicable than the investigators could have imagined. The full details of what was found on the tape I can't go into, but the evil he subjected her to was beyond barbaric. Loden recorded himself brutally violating Leesa, sexually torturing her for over 4 hours. Although his face is never seen on tape, his voice is clearly heard, and it was evidently taken inside his van. On the recording, he forces her to take part in various depraved acts, demands she smile so he can see her braces, and laughs at her. When Leesa is seen begging him to stop because she's hurting, he ignores her pleas and instead mocks her for taking her virginity. The tape is filmed in multiple parts. The final scene shows Leesa is evidently deceased, and Loden continuing to violate her body. You know, it's bad enough having to read about the awful things that he put Leesa through. I cannot imagine having to see it. I have the utmost sympathy for investigative officers who've got to view materials like that. It can't be easy. An autopsy found that Leesa Marie Gray had died of asphyxiation by manual strangulation. The pathologist noted that her killer had in fact stolen her virginity in the most brutal way. She had large bruises on her forehead, lower lip, the back of her neck, scalp, and on her right cheek. Deep furrows were found on her wrists and ankles from over-tightened rope. She had bruises on her left arm which were consistent with defensive injuries, and further bruising was found on Leesa's chest, back, and genitals. It was possible that Thomas Loden might attempt to deny the man on the tape was himself, but the back of his van contained a number of other items of interest. A .22 caliber revolver, along with a box of hollow point high-velocity cartridges. The crime lab also recovered Leesa's clothing, a blanket, a cucumber, and a plastic Walmart bag, which had tape wrapped around the top, tape that had hair fibres stuck to it. There was also a package of box cutter blades like these ones. DNA testing was performed on the bloodied shorts found in Loden's bedroom. The blood was Leesa's. Her DNA was also found on the cucumber along with Loden's. Both of their DNA was discovered on a disposable razor. His fingerprints were also found on the conspicuous Walmart bag, and the hairs stuck to the tape were microscopically similar to Leesa's. The self-inflicted injuries to Loden were found to be superficial, and he was released from hospital and charged the following day, the 24th. He continued to deny his involvement. Meanwhile, officers searching the farm made a discovery: a shovel and a freshly dug grave in some well-hidden, thickly vegetated woodland nearby. He'd evidently been planning on making sure Leesa would never be found. A few days after his arrest, Loden's wife visited him in jail. It was through her that he finally indicated that he wished to make a confession. This is his version of events. He said he arrived to find the farm in disarray and his grandmother fragile. Upset, he drank some beer and bourbon and took some non-specific drugs throughout the day. He then had a heated argument on the phone with his wife. He said he did go to Coma's to eat. Apparently, he discovered Leesa stranded on the roadside with a flat tyre at 10:45 p.m, and being the good Samaritan that he is, he stopped to help, saying, "Don't worry, I'm a Marine, we do this kind of stuff." In passing conversation, he asked her if she'd ever considered joining the Marines. She allegedly replied, "No, that would be the last thing I want to do with my life." Apparently her response made him so enraged that he ordered her to get in the van. She stood no chance. He was 6'4" and muscular with military training, and Leesa was 5'1" and weighed 110 pounds. He drove to his grandmother's house where he got some water, the blanket and the cucumber, and over the next 4 hours he violently forced himself on her, including 3 incidents not caught on tape. Loden apparently didn't remember videotaping the events at all, or killing Leesa, but he acknowledged that he must have put her in a sleeper hold and choked her. He then stuffed her broken body beneath the seat and went to sleep in the farmhouse. He said when he awoke the following morning, he went to the van and saw Leesa's body. He went back into the house for a coffee, then drove around in the farm's pickup to think. When he got back to the farm, he saw officers searching for him and ran away, later to be found injured by the roadside. So he was just trying to be a good Samaritan, but he snapped. We only have his word for that, and there was a crucial flaw to his story. Because police had already found the blade from a box cutter embedded in the centre of Leesa's tyre tread, a blade which was identical to those found in the back of Loden's van. This indicated that the attack was premeditated. The police theorised Loden had become infatuated with Leesa at Coma's, and he planned the attack the moment she rejected him. He pierced her tyre as he left the restaurant, then waited somewhere nearby for her to leave, before stalking her car until she pulled over. He knew the tyre would go down shortly after she drove away, and that he could get her alone at the side of the road. He killed her and planned to bury her, but was startled when the police turned up and took the van. In desperation, he carved the melodramatic apology into his chest and the superficial scratches into his wrists. He no doubt was hoping that it would look like he was crippled with remorse. Despite his confession and all the evidence, including actual video footage of the crimes in action, Thomas Loden pled not guilty to the charges. I can only imagine it was in the hope of mounting some form of insanity defence. And at the request of his defence team, Loden was evaluated by 2 psychiatrists and a psychologist at Mississippi State Hospital. Perhaps they could get to the bottom of how such an upstanding veteran with no criminal history could suddenly commit such a vicious crime, and there was a lot to unpack. Loden reported a history of childhood abuse. He said as a result he began to hurt animals, and later began to derive sexual pleasure from seeing others suffer. He was found to have combat-related PTSD following his stint in the Gulf War, where he witnessed the death of a close friend. Apparently he was never the same after this, and he turned to drink after suffering from flashbacks, nightmares and crippling anxiety. More recently there was job and life-related stress, his despair at seeing his grandmother in a frail state, the breakdown of the relationship with his wife. He laid it on thick, and there was no way of knowing how much was true or how exaggerated it all was in an effort to justify his actions or mitigate his responsibility. But all three mental health professionals were unanimous. Even if all of these factors were true, Thomas Loden knew that what he was doing was wrong. He was deemed sane and fully accountable for his disturbing actions. His team weren't happy with these results though, so they got a fourth opinion from an independent psychologist. He also found Loden accountable. He was fit to stand trial. This was a huge blow to his defence. In the lead up to the trial, Loden attempted to have his confession suppressed, along with all the evidence found at his grandmother's farm. These motions were denied, and in a surprise twist, on September 21, 2001, 17 days before it was due to begin, Thomas Loden waived his right to a jury trial and pled guilty to all charges. He said it was his way of demonstrating remorse, in avoiding putting the family through a 2-week trial. But it's hardly admirable. He'd already exhausted all other options and was faced with a mountain of evidence, even court documents described as being of Himalayan proportions. Thomas Loden's sentencing hearing lasted 10 hours. He offered no objection or mitigating evidence whatsoever to help his case. Before being sentenced, he turned to Leesa's family and said, "I hope you may have some sense of justice when you leave here today." The county district attorney was seeking a death penalty. He said, "We lost the life of a beautiful young girl. By now she would have graduated high school and been on her way to college. Because of him, she's dead." Thomas Edwin Loden was sentenced to 30 years for rape, plus another 30 for each of the 4 counts of sexual battery, a total of 150 years. For Leesa's murder, he was sentenced to death. Loden spent the next 21 years challenging his conviction. He claimed his original attorney gave him poor advice that led to him pleading guilty. He leaned on the fact he was a well-decorated soldier with no criminal record, and he argued that the mitigating factors, the abuse and PTSD, weren't properly considered. As part of one appeal, he was assessed by a 5th psychiatrist, who, based on what Loden told him, diagnosed him as having chronic and complex PTSD, borderline personality disorder, and dissociative amnesia, and concluded that he was suffering from these at the time of the murder. Nonetheless, all of his appeals were denied. In the end, the Supreme Court decided none of it would have made a difference to his death sentence anyway, and an execution date was eventually set, December 14th, 2022, a Wednesday. It was met with some opposition. A number of people turned up to protest the execution. They said that 21 years on death row was excessive and inhumane. A spokesperson for Ignite Justice said, "Clearly something in him snapped for him to commit such a horrific crime. Mr. Loden was immediately remorseful. Shouldn't there be room for grace and mercy in such a situation?" He was remorseful because he'd carved a superficial apology into his chest. This was a man who tried to suppress evidence pre-trial, convinced 5 psychological professionals that he wasn't accountable, and spent his remaining years trying to appeal the conviction. But he's sorry?
Elephant shit.
Most of these protesters were promptly driven away by heavy storms that arrived soon after. Despite a last-minute attempt to block the execution due to an ongoing appeal, 58-year-old Thomas Loden died by lethal injection at 6:12 p.m. on December 14, 2022. For his final meal, he had pork chops, okra, and Pillsbury Grand biscuits, followed by peach cobbler with French vanilla ice cream. He washed it down with some sweet tea. Leesa didn't get a last meal. She'd spent her last 3 moments serving food to others. These were his last words. "For the past 20 years I've tried to do a good deed every single day, to make up for the life I took from this world. If today brings you nothing else, I hope you get peace and closure." That's the cold stare of a heartless killer if ever I've seen one. Leesa's mother Wanda witnessed the execution. She said she forgave him years ago, but she didn't think his remorse was genuine. A prayer vigil for Leesa took place at the same time her killer was put to death. But I don't want to end this video talking about him. I want to end it talking about Leesa. In this tiny community, more than 1,000 people attended the funeral service for Leesa inside her school gymnasium. 3 guest books were filled with signatures, and cars took every inch of parking space. Loved ones shared memories, wept at the eulogies, and comforted her brother James in his little navy suit. And she was never forgotten. Her picture still hangs in comas to this day. Her mother said, "I was in my own little world for 4 years. I finally said I've got to let her go. I thank the Lord I had her for 16 years. I wish it could have been more, but I know she is in a better place in heaven." Leesa's best friend still thinks about her every day. And she still has this bracelet, engraved with Leesa's handwriting. I'll be right there with you. Love, always, Leesa. It's one of those cases that's just so hard to rationalise. Was Loden evil to the core, or was he the product of trauma? Or was he both? Maybe Leesa was his first victim, or maybe this was just the first time he was caught. Who knows? Let me know what you think down in the comments. I know people are going to have a lot to say about this one. And thank you so much for stopping by. As always, if you appreciated this video, please give it a quick like, think about subscribing, and hopefully I'll see you again next time. Bye for now.